The retirement order arrived on a Tuesday, which seemed wrong somehow. Tuesdays were farrier days. Tuesdays smelled like hoof oil and warm hay, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists before London wakes up. They were not days for paperwork that ended things. Corporal James Hartley found the envelope on the tack room bench at 4:53 in the morning, propped against his grooming kit with the careful placement of something someone had not wanted to hand to him directly. Ministry of Defense letterhead, his regimental number in the top right corner, and beneath it, in the clean, indifferent font of institutional finality, a subject line that took him 3 readings to fully absorb. Compulsory retirement notice, Sovereign Irish Draft Gelding, service number EQ 447. Effective date, Friday. He set it back down on the bench, picked up his curry comb, walked the 12 steps to Sovereign's stall the way he had walked them every morning for 14 years, and said nothing at all. Sovereign was already awake. He was always already awake when Hartley arrived, had been since the first winter, when Hartley was 23 and newly assigned, and had no idea that a horse could recognize a specific footstep out of 40 others on a cobblestone yard. The big black Irish draft stood at his door with his head angled in that particular way, ears forward, one eye tracking Hartley's approach with the calm certainty of an animal that has never once been surprised by this man's arrival. Hartley ran the comb along Sovereign's neck without speaking. The horse leaned into it slightly, the way he always did, shifting his weight with a patience that had taken years to develop and which now looked like dignity. His coat was still dark and clean despite 19 years. His legs were sound. His eyes were clear. The retirement order had described him as having reached the threshold age for ceremonial service, which was accurate in the same way that describing a cathedral as a building with a roof was accurate. The yard around them was beginning to fill with the sounds of mourning. Buckets, bolts sliding back on stall doors, the low voices of troopers who had not yet had tea and were not yet required to be fully human. Through the high stable windows, London was still gray and unresolved, the city not yet committed to the day. Hartley finished the grooming without hurrying, checked Sovereign's shoes, picked his feet, filled the water, did every small thing in the correct order, the same order, the order they had established together so long ago that neither of them needed to think about it anymore. Then he went back to the tack room, sat on the bench beside the envelope, and read the letter all the way through for the first time. It was thorough. He would give them that. The Ministry of Defense Equine Welfare Division had done its work carefully. Sovereign's service record was attached to 14 years, over 300 ceremonial appearances, 11 trooping the color parades, 4 state funerals, 1 occasion where he had remained perfectly still for 4 hours and 11 minutes during a Commonwealth ceremony while a wasp investigated his left ear. The retirement farm in Wiltshire was described in 3 paragraphs. Paddock size, veterinary oversight, companionship arrangements. The language was kind in the way that language written by people who will not be present tends to be kind. He folded the letter, put it in his breast pocket, went back to work. He told no one. Sandra Voss arrived at Hyde Park Barracks at 9:15 on Wednesday morning, which was 1 day earlier than the order specified, which told Hartley everything he needed to know about how this was going to go. She came through the main gate in a dark ministry vehicle with a transport order on a clipboard, and the expression of someone who had done this particular task before, and had learned to do it efficiently because efficiency was the only thing that made it bearable. She was not unkind. That was the thing Hartley kept returning to afterward, in the days that followed. She was not unkind. She introduced herself to the duty sergeant with the careful courtesy of someone who understood they were walking into grief and had chosen professionalism as their protection against it. She had reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a pen that she clicked once, twice, then stopped clicking when she noticed the yard had gone quiet. The quiet was not subtle. 12 troopers who had been busy a moment before were no longer busy. They were doing the thing that soldiers do when they disagree with an order and are not permitted to say so. They were present, standing in their tasks, not moving away, not looking directly at Voss, but not looking away either. The regimental farrier, a Scotsman named McGrath who had been shoeing household cavalry horses for 22 years, set down his hammer with a deliberateness that was its own kind of statement. Sergeant Davies, who had served with Hartley for 11 of the 14 years, met Voss at the yard entrance with the specific expression of a man performing cooperation. "Miss Voss, we've been expecting you." He had not technically been expecting her until Thursday. He did not say this. "The transport is confirmed for Friday," Voss said, checking her clipboard. "I'm here for the pre-transfer welfare assessment. Standard procedure for service animals above 15 years. Of course, I'll need access to the animal's stable and his current handler for the assessment interview." Davies turned and looked across the yard to where Hartley was standing at Sovereign's door. Hartley had not moved since Voss arrived. He was not watching her. He was watching Sovereign, one hand resting on the horse's nose, not doing anything with it, just resting it there. "Corporal Hartley," Davies called. Hartley came across the yard with the unhurried walk of a man who has decided in advance how he is going to conduct himself. He stopped 2 paces from Voss and came to a loose attention. His face was the face of 14 years of ceremonial service, still correct, giving nothing away. "Miss Voss." "Corporal, I understand this is difficult." "I'd like to request a delay," he said, without having been asked if he had anything to say. "Sovereign is scheduled for the final summer parade on Saturday. He's been part of that parade for 12 consecutive years. I'd like him to complete it." Voss made a note. The welfare assessment has determined that extended ceremonial duty beyond the designated retirement threshold carries risk of. "He's sound," McGrath said from across the yard without looking up. Voss glanced over. McGrath had picked his hammer back up and was doing something industrious with it that may or may not have required doing. "The decision isn't a reflection of his current condition," Voss said carefully. "It's a structured protocol that exists to protect animals from being kept in service beyond what is appropriate." "He's appropriate," Hartley said. "He'd tell you himself if he wasn't." A pause. Voss clicked her pen once, then remembered she'd stopped doing that. "I understand your attachment, Corporal, genuinely, but the protocol exists for good reason, and my assessment cannot be." Sovereign reached over his stable door and placed his nose directly on Voss's clipboard. Not aggressively, not with any apparent intent. He simply lowered his large head over the door with the calm curiosity of an animal investigating something new, and breathed once, heavily, directly onto the transport order. The paper crumpled slightly, a corner lifted. Sergeant Davies looked at the middle distance. McGrath's hammer found something extremely important to do. Hartley's expression did not change, though something around his eyes did. Voss straightened her clipboard with both hands. "I'll complete the assessment," she said, "and submit my report as scheduled." Nobody argued. Sovereign withdrew his nose and returned to contemplating the yard with the serene detachment of an animal that has attended enough ceremonial occasions to understand that humans frequently make a great deal of fuss about things that will resolve themselves eventually. Thursday came with low cloud and the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Hartley was in the yard before 5. He tacked Sovereign up in the full ceremonial dress, the polished steel of the breastplate, the black bridle with its brass fittings, the white plume that Sovereign had always regarded with deep personal suspicion, and had, on 3 separate occasions over 14 years, attempted to remove with his teeth. No one had told him to do this. No order had been issued. He simply did it the way he had done it 300 times before, moving through the routine with the focused quiet of a man conducting a private ritual that he has not announced and does not intend to explain. When he led Sovereign out into the yard, the other troopers stopped. He didn't ask for the gate to be opened. Davies opened it. Hartley swung up into the saddle with the ease of someone for whom this motion had long since ceased to be a conscious act, settled, gathered the reins, and rode out onto the street. They went through the park first. Early dog walkers stepped aside without being asked. There is something about a household cavalry horse in full dress at 5 in the morning that communicates its own authority. Sovereign moved with the particular quality of attention he reserved for ceremonial work, collected and deliberate, his feet finding the correct pace without being asked for it. Then they turned toward horse guards. The route was not the direct route. It was the ceremonial route, the full sequence, exactly as written for trooping the color, every turn in its correct position, every pace at its correct length. Hartley gave almost no commands. Sovereign did not need them. He had walked this ground so many times that the route lived in him somewhere below conscious thought, in the part of an animal that knows things through repetition until knowing and being become the same thing. They passed the place where a state funeral procession had once caused Sovereign to stand motionless for 20 minutes while a military band played 30 feet from his left ear. He did not flinch now at the memory of it, or perhaps he did not have memories in that way, or perhaps he did, and they were simply not frightening to him, because Hartley had always been there. They completed the full route in 41 minutes. When they returned through the barrack gate, the yard was full. Every trooper on the base who was not on essential duty was standing there, not in formation, not at attention, just standing. McGrath had his arms folded. Davies was looking at his boots. Hartley dismounted, ran up his stirrups, began to untack Sovereign with the same systematic care he'd used that morning and every morning before it. Nobody spoke for a long time. That was unauthorized use of ceremonial dress equipment, Davies said eventually. Yes, Sergeant, Hartley said. Another pause. Looked right, though, Davies said. Yes, Sergeant. Voss found him at the stable door an hour later. She had her clipboard, her report half completed, her pen in her hand. She stopped a few feet back. Corporal, I need to finalize the assessment. Hartley stepped slightly to the side. Not an invitation exactly, more the absence of an obstacle. Voss came to stand beside him at the stable door. Sovereign was inside, postride, a little steamed around the neck still, pulling slowly at his hay net with the meditative focus of a horse that has accomplished what it set out to accomplish and is now attending to the important work of eating. He's in good condition, Voss said, writing something. Yes. The ride this morning was his idea, Hartley said. Voss looked up from her clipboard. Watch his ears, Hartley said. She watched. Sovereign continued pulling at the hay net, not looking in their direction. Now step back 2 paces, Hartley said. Voss stepped back. Sovereign's left ear swiveled, not toward Voss, away from her, tracking something else. Now I'll step back, Hartley said. He moved back. Both of Sovereign's ears moved immediately, rotating with the precision of instruments calibrated for a single frequency. The horse did not turn his head. He did not stop eating, but his entire attention shifted, invisibly to everyone except anyone who had ever spent 14 years learning to read it. Voss stood very still. He does that every morning, Hartley said. Before I'm close enough for him to hear, before I come around the corner, he knows. Voss said nothing for a moment. She was watching the ears. That's not uncommon in horses with long handler relationships, she said finally. Her voice had changed by approximately 1 degree. No, Hartley agreed, it isn't. She finished writing her note, clicked her pen. The transport was still confirmed for Friday. Her report would reflect what the protocol required it to reflect, because the protocol existed for good reason, and her job was to apply it consistently, because consistent application was what made it fair, and fairness was what she had spent 20 years building into a system that had previously had very little of it. She left the stable without saying what she had come to say, which was that she was sorry. She had found, over the years, that saying it did not help and sometimes made things worse, and so she had stopped saying it, and she could not now remember at what point exactly that had happened. Colonel Richard Ashby arrived at 1400 hours on Thursday, which was when Hartley had already begun to understand that this was the kind of story that ends with a trailer and a Wiltshire paddock, and letters written on Sunday evenings to a horse that cannot read them. He arrived in a staff car but got out of it before the driver had fully stopped, which was not how Colonel Ashby usually moved, and several people noticed this. He was 61. He had served in the household cavalry for 38 years. He had ridden in 6 trooping the color parades himself, in the years before administrative rank had pulled him away from the horses and toward the paperwork, which he had never fully forgiven the promotion system for. He walked through the yard with the specific efficiency of a man who knows exactly where he is going and has already decided what he is going to do when he gets there, but is not going to rush because rushing would suggest he wasn't certain, and he was certain. He found Hartley in the tack room cleaning a bridle. The cleaning was not necessary. The bridle had been cleaned that morning. Hartley cleaned things when he was doing nothing was not an option. "Corporal." Hartley stood. "Sit down," Ashby said, and sat down himself on the opposite bench, which immediately made the conversation something other than what Hartley had been preparing for. Commanding officers who were about to deliver bad news did not sit on tack room benches. They stood. They looked at points above your head. They used the phrase "I understand this is difficult" with exactly the same inflection Voss had used, which was the inflection of people who understood it theoretically. Ashby set a slim manila folder on the bench between them. He didn't open it immediately. "How long have you been with Sovereign?" he asked, as though he did not know, which he did. 14 years, sir, since he was 5. "And in those 14 years, has he ever refused a command?" Hartley thought about it honestly because it was an honest question. "Once," he said. "A car backfired 6 feet from him during the 2019 parade. He shied, came back to attention on his own before I corrected him." Ashby nodded slowly. "Once," he repeated, "in 14 years." He opened the folder. Inside was a single document, older than the folder itself. The paper slightly yellowed at the edges with the specific quality of something that had been filed away and not touched and had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for the right moment to be useful. He placed it on the bench and turned it so Hartley could read it. The letterhead was the Household Cavalry Regimental crest. The date in the top corner was 1971. The language was formal and slightly archaic and absolutely unambiguous. Ashby read the relevant section aloud anyway, because some things need to be heard. In recognition of the unique nature of the bond formed between a serving animal and their designated handler through extended ceremonial duty, the regimental commanding authority reserves the right, at its sole discretion, to authorize the transfer of a retiring service animal into the permanent civilian custody of said handler, subject to the handler's agreement to assume full responsibility for the animal's welfare, care, and costs thereafter. He set it down. The tack room was very quiet. Outside, someone was filling a water bucket. The sound of it carried with perfect clarity. "That clause has been invoked 4 times in this regiment's history," Ashby said. 1974, 1989, 2003, 2011. He looked at Hartley. "I've already spoken with the ministry. Miss Voss's transport order is being withdrawn." Hartley did not speak. "The farm you'd need," Ashby continued in the tone of a man completing a list of logistics, "would need to be within reasonable distance. You'd need to register as keeper. The regimental vet will do the annual checks for the first 3 years at no cost to you, as is standard under the clause." He paused. "I assume you have somewhere in mind." Hartley's sister had 12 acres in Berkshire. She had offered, in a phone call 3 weeks ago, that Hartley had not fully absorbed because he had not yet decided to believe it would matter. that there was a paddock and a field shelter, and that she had already asked her farrier about it, and the farrier had said it was fine. "Yes, sir," he said, "I have somewhere." Ashby nodded once. He did not smile exactly, but something in his face settled into a configuration that was adjacent to satisfaction. "The paperwork needs your signature," he said, sliding the folder across. "And his." Hartley looked up. Ashby's expression did not change. "I'm told he stepped on the transport order yesterday." A pause seemed relevant, Ashby said. They signed the papers in the stable. This had not been a formal decision. Hartley had simply walked there after leaving Ashby's office, and Ashby had followed, and Davies had appeared from somewhere, and McGrath had stopped pretending to have somewhere else to be. The folder went on the small wooden shelf outside Sovereign's stall, where the grooming kit usually sat. Hartley signed, dated it, clipped the pen, stood for a moment looking at his own signature on the document. Then he turned to the stable door and put his forehead against Sovereign's neck, just below the crest, where the coat was dense and warm and smelled of the same horse he had been tacking up in the dark since he was 23 years old. He stayed there for a while, long enough for McGrath to find something urgent to inspect on the far side of the yard, long enough for Davies to clear his throat twice and then give up clearing his throat, long enough for Sovereign to shift his weight slightly and settle his head over Hartley's shoulder with the ease of an animal who has done this before, in smaller moments, and knows exactly what it means. Sandra Voss was at the gate when the staff car came through to collect Colonel Ashby. She had been completing her amended report in the vehicle, which was parked at the edge of the yard, and she had watched the procession to the stable without intending to. She had watched Hartley disappear inside, had watched the other soldiers drift toward it and then not quite enter it, had watched Ashby fold his hands behind his back and wait outside the door with the patience of a man who has learned that some things deserve to complete themselves. She finished her report, set her clipboard on the passenger seat, sat for a moment. Through the stable door, she could see the very edge of Sovereign's flank, dark and still, and the shape of Hartley's shoulder against it. She had been doing equine welfare assessments for 19 years. She had removed horses from service that were suffering and horses that were not, and the protocol did not distinguish between them because the protocol was designed for the aggregate and not the particular, and she believed in that genuinely. Because without it, the system collapsed into sentiment, and sentiment was not a welfare standard. But she had watched the ears. She picked up her pen. In the notes section of her report, in the field marked additional observations, she wrote 7 words that were not required by the protocol and would not affect the outcome because the outcome had already been determined by a 1971 document she had not known existed. She wrote them anyway. "This animal knows this man, that's enough." Then she set the report aside, started the engine, and drove out through the gate into the ordinary London afternoon, where nobody knew what had just happened in a stable behind a regimental wall, and the city went on being the city, entirely indifferent to the particular mercy that had just been extended in one quiet corner of it. The trailer came on Saturday morning, which was Hartley's day off, which he had arranged deliberately. He loaded Sovereign himself, without help, the way he had always done, talking the whole time in the low, continuous murmur that Sovereign had been listening to since he was 5 years old, and which meant, in whatever language horses understand such things, that everything was fine, everything was known. There was nothing here that they had not already done together. Sovereign walked into the trailer without hesitation. McGrath, who had appeared at the yard entrance at 6 in the morning for no stated reason, raised one hand as the trailer pulled away. Davies, beside him, did not raise his hand. He stood with his arms folded and watched until the trailer was through the gate and the gate had closed, and then he went back inside and did something administrative that took the rest of the morning. The drive to Berkshire was 2 hours and 20 minutes. Sovereign traveled the way he had always traveled, calmly, with the self-possessed patience of an animal that has learned, through long experience, that the thing at the other end of a journey is almost always heartly. The paddock at his sister's farm was 12 acres of flat Berkshire grass with a field shelter at the south end, and a hedgerow along the north boundary that moved in the wind in a way that Sovereign investigated thoroughly on the first afternoon, and then apparently decided was acceptable. The other horse in the adjacent paddock was a retired show jumper named Biscuit, who had strong opinions about mealtimes and no opinions whatsoever about ceremonial service, and this appeared to suit Sovereign perfectly. Hartley spent the first afternoon sitting on the paddock fence watching Sovereign graze. Just that. Not doing anything with it, not producing anything from it, not performing any version of a feeling for anyone's benefit. Just sitting on a fence in Berkshire watching a 19-year-old Irish draft move slowly through long grass, ears relaxed and low, coat catching the afternoon light the same way it had caught the morning light in a London stable yard for 14 years. At some point, his sister brought tea and set it on the fence post beside him and went back inside, because she understood the situation without needing it explained. He stayed until the light changed. Sovereign looked up once, directly at him, with the attentive and unsentimental clarity that horses reserve for things that matter. Then he put his head back down and resumed grazing, because the grass was there, and it was good, and the afternoon was long, and there was no ceremony today, and no orders and no crowd watching. Just the field, just the fence, just the particular quiet of an ending that had become, at the last possible moment, the beginning of something else. Should institutions ever have the power to separate bonds that took a lifetime to build, simply because a regulation says the time is up? Was Colonel Ashby right to invoke a clause that most people didn't even know existed? And if you had been Sandra Voss, standing at that gate, watching through a stable door, what would you have written in the notes field of your report? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If you believe that loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that takes 14 years to build and cannot be filed or transferred or retired, deserves to be protected, hit the like button now. Subscribe with notifications on so you never miss the stories that happen quietly, behind gates and stable doors, where nobody is watching and everything that matters is decided. Share this with someone who has ever loved something that couldn't tell them it loved them back. And if you're still here at the end, you already know exactly what Sandra Voss wrote and why it was enough.